What is the future of some of the biggest players on the Hershey Bears? We'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Hershey Bears winning the Calder Cup. What players are due for a promotion? We'll talk about that in this episode. Then we will talk about the standout players of not just the Calder Cup, but the entire last season. And then where we'll start tonight is the Bears win their 12th Calder Cup. And in this episode, we are happy to have Richard Blosser of the Grit and Barrett podcast. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hey, brother Dan, thank you for having me on. And yes, the Hershey Bears are the 12-time Calder Cup champions, baby.
Let's hear it.
Great time, fun time in Chocolate Town, indeed.
Let's hear it.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
So the first time since 2010, but this team is no stranger to winning Calder Cups, as this is their 12th win, an AHL record. Tell me a little bit about a guy that covers this team on a regular basis, what this means for you and the Hershey Bears.
This means a lot. I mean, this is my first championship after I've been doing the show for about 4 or 5 years, even through lockdown and everything we went through. The first time I started really going to the Bears was in 09 and 10 when they won that 11th Cup and just came off of their winning their 10th. So for me, in watching this team and all this time, I've seen them go through a 13-year drought. Well, they haven't had one, which has been the longest they've had in existence, which I think was in between 1938 and probably 1951. I probably got the years wrong, but around those lines very early on between their first and second championship. But this squad, we knew that they had cup aspirations. The Hershey Bears are the New York Yankees of the American Hockey League. It's championship or bust. And this year really felt like that this team could go on a run, that this team had the depth, it had the goaltending, it wanted to play a really good, tight defensive type of hockey. It was a team that was going to ugly it up. It was a team that was going to force you to win 3-2, 2-1 games. And that's exactly what they did to Coachella, and were able to pull it out in a Game 7 overtime out there in Southern California, there in the Palm Desert. It was a long day that following Thursday, but worth it to see them pull off their 12th Calder Cup. Mike Vecchione in overtime at 16:01 claimed the cup for Hershey. And just so your fan base can listen to, during the Stanley Cup Finals, the games typically start around 8 p.m. Central Eastern time.
Mm-hmm.
This started at 10 p.m. Standard Time and was 7 all the way out there in Coachella Valley. So it's not like the Stanley Cup Finals where you started 8 and like Vegas started at 5. No, this was 10 o'clock our time. So Mike Vecchione scored at 1:31 a.m. here back home, but worth it.
Yeah, it was crazy when I was watching it. And I saw, I'm like, I'm going to watch it tonight because it's Game 7. I'm like, well, I'm going to sit down and watch it. It'll be about 7 o'clock local for me. And then I'm like, oh, nope, it's going to be 9 o'clock where I live here. So it was difficult. And I'm like, if there's a game to stay up for, we know the Capitals didn't get the season that they wanted, but this is the next greatest thing to the Capitals, the Hershey Bears. Game 7, winner takes all on the road. And it was interesting because if you looked at it, the road teams didn't win games except for Game 7. So they were also down 2-0 in this game. I'm like, why am I staying up this late? Why am I screwing myself for tomorrow? But as it turns out, it was worth it. What did it mean for you? Just game 7, as we know that the Firebirds were kind of steamrolling the Hershey Bears, and then it came back to Hershey, or the series went to Hershey rather, and then the Bears took control of it. So it was difficult because I knew it was going to end up going back there, just based on the history of the series. I'm like, they're not going to win this game because it's going to be on the road. For you, was there positivity in you? Was there optimism that they were going to be able to find a way to win game 7? Or were you like me when they were down 2-0 that they're probably going to lose this one?
Well, to tell you the truth, Dan, well, I say the truth on my podcast all the time. No, I was not very positive around halfway through that game when Max McCormick scored to make it 2-0, who just skated right in because 3 Hershey Bears decided to stay on a tie carte on the boards. I was like, this is it. We're done. We just can't win in Coachella Valley. Even when the Bears got the power play that Connor McMichael scored on, me and my friends had a group chat going, and we're like, we got to. 2 of them were like, we got to score here, and I was like, yeah, if we can. But Connor McMichael got it, and then Hendrix, LaPierre, 2 top Capitals prospects coming through big in game 7. And just so you know, Dan, for some more context for your audience, the Bears were outscored in this series 23-17 throughout the entire series. 3 games in Coachella Valley for them, they lost by a combined score of 14-2. Yeah. And game 7 was the only one that was close. The Bears won 3 out of their 4 games were won in overtime, including the series winner. And even game 4, where they won 3-2, was a very close, intense game. And so I honestly thought it was just going to be another blowout there in Palm Desert, that the Firebirds were just going to have their way. But credit to the Bears, who clawed back for their 4th comeback from 2-0 down. In fact, they did one in one of every series against Charlotte, Hartford, Rochester, and now Coachella Valley. So just another notch in this team that's just done so much to bring a 12th Calder Cup to Hershey.
And then giving credit where credit's due, Dan Bylsma, who used to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins at one time, he really got that team dialed in as well. And, the thing of it is, I don't like the team, but I do like their logo. That is a sharp-looking jersey that they have out there. I'm like, well, if, it's too bad that we're an opposing team. Otherwise, I might even be prone to buying something like that. Never happened, but it is a pretty sharp-looking jersey. All right, coming up straight ahead here, we will talk about standout players on the Hershey Bears. And a little bit later in the show, we will also talk about which players are due for a promotion. We'll talk about that next. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to join today. Even if you're not interested in the game you're watching, if you have a little bit of money on it, it makes watching the games that much more exciting. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and subscribe or follow Locked On Capitals wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. I have a lot of great guests lined up for you guys this summer, like Richard Blosser tonight, so make sure and subscribe to Locked On Capitals today. All right, in this next segment, we are going to talk about some of the standout players on the team. Ethen Frank, during the regular season, if I take a look at the stats here, led the team with 30 goals. An interesting character, kind of was just lighting it up during the regular season, kind of lost his way a little bit in the playoffs, but seemed to then find his way again. Talk to me about Ethen Frank, who led the team. Is his trajectory going up, or was he facing what I spoke to you guys about before, that rookie wall that some of the players run into? What is your assessment of Ethen Frank?
Well, Ethen picked a heck of a time to get, I think his second goal of the postseason, maybe his first. It was a one-time power play goal that he just gripped and ripped and blasted by Joey Decord. That was one of the many turning points of the series. That was the Bears' first goal of the series, first power play goal of the series, and first lead. So Ethen, along with a few other guys on the team, really stepped up in those big home games for Hershey to be able to get the proverbial home sweep. Ethen had a pretty darn good finals. I mean, when the big boys need to step up, they honestly did. And while if you look at Ethen's overall body work during the playoffs, it's kind of lackluster because he really didn't do much in the majority of the playoffs. And some could chalk that up to, well, your best scorers get neutralized in the playoffs and you rely on your depth, which is true, but sometimes you need to rely on that top six as well. So I think Ethen was able to finish well, but he was still very much a liability throughout most of the, well, not liability, but he wasn't there throughout most of the postseason. That shouldn't hinder his trajectory. I think he'll get a good long look in DC there September. Don't be surprised if he sticks around longer than the first week of training camp.
And then just what he did in the All-Star game as well. Wasn't he like the fastest skater out there? I mean, he brings a lot of intangibles, but a goal scoring, a fast skater. I think on paper, he's poised to be a really great player. And then just taking a look a little bit further down the list, Vecchione with 23 goals and Sgarbossa with 21. I don't know if there is a spot for Vecchione or Sgarbossa on the team. And Scarbossa's case, I think that he is kind of that veteran voice to that team. Would you say that that is a safe assessment? You can't just have all young guys. You need a little bit of experience as well, right?
Very much so. Mike Sgarbossa is definitely the proverbial glue that held the first line together. The elder statesman, though I think he's only like 29 or 30 in the American Hockey League that qualifies as it. But he unfortunately was dealing with the dreaded upper body injury through the majority of the playoffs, so he did not get much time, only had like 2 games. But he's definitely a proverbial glue, a real leader in the locker room. He's a great teacher for any of the young kids that come through. So very happy that he's going to be sticking around. Mike Vecchione is a great playmaker, can score when he needs to, not all the time, but he's a great setup guy who can help out younger forwards and set them up. So 2 very good leaders, guys who will definitely be wearing A's on their jerseys next year here in Hershey. So yes, it's very good to have a Sgarbossa and Vecchione around, even if they're not going to do anything in DC outside of staying the first week of training camp. Their value is very much in Hershey, playing as the veterans to a lot of these rookies.
And then just kind of taking a look at a couple of the players that are on the Capitals' radar. First of all, Connor McMichael here, who had, kind of a healthy scratch for a good stay up with the Capitals, really found his way down in Hershey with 16 goals, and Hendrix LaPierre with 15, who had a bit more of a bumpy ride during the regular season. But taking a look at Connor McMichael, he is mature beyond his years. He got the big call up to the big team and, was a healthy scratch. And, some guys, especially younger guys, might have sulked a little bit and said, what's going on? And I want to get traded, something like that. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to go about my business in Hershey. And if I'm that great of a player, people will notice that. And I think just taking a look at what he did in the Calder Cup push, you take a look at what he did in his time during the regular season in Hershey, I think he cemented his place on the big team. Talk to me about Connor McMichael and how he did just go about his business down in Hershey.
I think he went about his business very well. I think he was good to get consistent playing time and really develop his skills. And he's just like, we knew Connor McMichael was special, and I was one in the 2021 saying, send him down to us. We can do a lot of great things with him, and it never really progressed. But this entire year was just showing Washington what he can do. And he was a valuable piece for Hershey in the postseason. 6 goals, led the entire team. And I know 6 goals leading in the playoffs is not much. It just shows you the depth that Hershey had going into this postseason. But he was a great presence, has a nose for the puck, and at times showed that hockey IQ of he knows where the puck is going to be, which is a very valuable skill. He's definitely going to be in the red, white, and blue next year. me and the guys have said, enjoy the time with McMichael because he's definitely going to be in DC next year, especially with Spencer Carberry there behind the bench. He's definitely going to tag Connor McMichael up there for DC. So you're going to see a very different Connor McMichael up there in DC, one that has matured and refined his skills and is going to be a pretty good, and I mean this in a good way possible, bottom six forward, maybe work his way up to middle six for the Washington Capitals next season.
And then, like we were talking about, Hendrix, LaPierre, who seemed to do a little bit better in the playoffs. So that was a positive sign for me there as well. But then taking a look at the blue line, there is some questions there about the future of Lucas Johansson, one of the guys that you hear about all the time. Next year is going to be his year. Nope, next year. Scratch that, the year after. I know that he has faced quite a bit of injury in his career. What is the blueprint? What is the trajectory for Lucas Johansson? Do you see him having a future in the NHL, most namely the Washington Capitals, or is he just going to be an AHL player? And I don't mean to say that in a disparaging way, but the above all end all for a hockey player is to play in the NHL. What is your outlook for Lucas Johansson?
I don't think there's a spot for Washington there on the blue line. I think they have other people in mind outside of him and Fiviari and AA, and a few more defensemen coming into the pipeline this season that will be entering Hershey as well. Lucas has just faced so many injuries throughout his career. It's always been something: a shoulder, a leg, a tear, a bump, something that gets in his way. And this year he has his first full season completely healthy. He's able to get a cup underneath his belt. Didn't score a lot, but he's been doing really good as a stay-at-home defenseman and playing on the left side next to Vinny Iorio, helping his development along. When Vinny's aggressive, he'll play back, or when Vinny's trying to get back on a back check, Lucas is barking out directions to him on which guy to cover. So there's some value in that Lucas can provide that guidance to a rookie. I think in terms of getting NHL blue line time, I think his future may lie elsewhere because I think Washington's got eyes for other defensemen outside of Lucas. Maybe his brother Ryan could put in a good word for him out west.
Yeah, Vinny Iorio is the guy I think that is poised on the blue line for greater things. I think he might get one of the first call-ups, if possible, next season. It is kind of a crowded blue line. But then also just the contributions of players that were on the Capitals that were eligible. You take a look at Protas, you take a look at Snively, Malenstein, who got his time with the Capitals before he got injured. So it was just a real team victory. And just as a Caps fan, I'm really happy for the Bears and the Capitals organization. All right, so coming up here, we will talk about what is next for a lot of those big players on the team. Where will they play? Will it be in Washington or Hershey? We'll talk about it straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're an everydayer of the show, you know that we talk about the future, oftentimes about the players in Hershey and where they're going to fit. And in this episode, we're lucky to have Richard Blosser, who covers the Hershey Bears. So let's start with the big elephant in the room for me. I think even above Connor McMichael, Hendrix, LaPierre, is Hunter Shepard, won the MVP, rated number 2 in all of the AHL, and is an unrestricted free agent. As we know, Zach Fucale is going to be going out to the KHL. Quite an interesting position the Capitals and the Bears find themselves in. One of the things that I had spoke about with different people on here is Charlie Lindgren. Good goalie. I think he did a good job, but I would almost view him as an asset. And if there's a taker, move him out of Washington and move in Hunter Shepard. Number 2 in the AHL and the MVP. These guys don't grow on trees. What do you think about Hunter Shepard? What is the long-term for him? And then also, what is the plan for the Bears in the event that they lose Fucale and Hunter Shepard?
That definitely look like that's what's going to happen in the offseason. Like you said, Fucale is going overseas to the KHL, and I think Hunter Shepard has a very real chance of being Washington's number 2, and he's definitely gone out there and proved it. 15-4 during this postseason run. Actually, 14-5, my mistake. 14-5 during this postseason run. Went toe to toe with Joey Daccord, who did time in Seattle as well. 3 shutouts in the postseason. Excuse me, and just really stepped up as the Bears, 1A goaltender through the entire season. The Bears have been running a 1A and a 1B. And I think Hunter Shepard could spend some time up in DC and very well be a number 2. I think he is ready. Now, we have Clay Stevenson waiting in the wings. He was our third. He got a lot of time in South Carolina as well. And we got one other prospect down there with the Stingrays as well. As you know, Chocolate Town has been pretty much a goalie factory for the better part of 2 decades. So Bears fans, we're quite used to goaltenders coming through the organization, but we know we have no shortage of them as well. I would not be surprised. Like you said, Charlie Lindgren could be dealt. I think there's a real chance he could get sent down to Hershey. And Charlie's done time in the American Hockey League in Springfield, St. John's Ice Caps when they were the Canadiens affiliate. He is no stranger to the American Hockey League. So that is, I think, could be a real possibility as well. Possibly him and Clay Stevens as well. If necessary, I believe Brian Helmer, Bears GM, definitely go out and look for a goaltender if it comes to that. I doubt it. But yeah, I agree. Hunter Shepard's definitely going to get turned a lot of heads there in DC. We had a lot of DC brass in Hershey during the at-home week, games 3, 4, and 5, and Hunter turned a lot of heads. So yes, I believe he will be in the red, white, and blue next year. I don't see any reason not to.
Because then in the pipeline, there's also Mitchell Gibson and Garen Bjorklund as well. And, one of those players most likely, I suppose Mitchell Gibson will be poised to be in ECHL. Then there's the other goalie, whose name escapes me. Wall, perhaps, is his last name. So,
yes. Yep.
So, I mean, there is just a lot of great talent. Always has been, if you look at historically in the Capitals organization. So I have no doubt that they'll figure it out. It's just what's going to happen with Hunter. And I really don't want him to get away, given the fact that Fucale, who was kind of the stud in the net the year before that. So it is an interesting position, but just players like we talked about due for a promotion, just knee-jerk reaction. I think Ethen Frank, who signed that new deal, I think he's going to get a good look. But what I've talked about with a lot of guys on the show, where does he fit in? That's the tough position. You talk about Connor McMichael. Great. Where is he going to fit in? I think that if he is going to excel, he's going to have to play at his native position, which is the center position. I know that he'll play the wing, if he's given his option, but I think that if he's going to excel, that's where he's going to be. And it's kind of crowded. I mean, you have Dylan Strome, you have Kuznetsov, you have Backstrom, you have Dowd. Who's sitting down to put him in there? I guess one could say potentially Kuznetsov, might be out of town, even though it's kind of not going in that direction. So a difficult thing. And, you could say the same thing for Ethen Frank, that a lot of times, they're looking for their opportunity. It's just, where are they going to fit in? But for you, as a guy that covers this team, the Hershey Bears, that is, if you had to pick the number one player who's due for a promotion next season, who is that going to be?
Connor McMichael. And that I did not even have to think about that. The Capitals have, pardon the pun, a lot of capita invested in him. Taking him in the first round, high expectations put on him. He comes down to Hershey, puts up good numbers. He didn't set the league on fire, but he did what was expected out of him. Stepped up in the postseason. He's captained power plays on the point this season. He has played center when needed to take faceoffs as well. And if there's a first name it's going to come up, it's going to be number 14 down here in Hershey, and is going to be Connor McMichael. I firmly believe he will be the first one up. I could see Ethen Frank being tagged as a second, but it wouldn't surprise me. They say, well, that was a really good season. Go do it again, and then we'll talk, or something like that. Unfortunately, that is the case in the NHL. But if the old injury bug comes by, I could see Ethen also getting the call as well. And on blue line wise, don't be surprised if Vinny Iorio gets a look as well. I think he needs another full season down here to just fine tune a few things of his skill set. But to answer your question, definitely Connor McMichael is the one that gets the call.
And that's exciting because we know Spencer Carberry's there. There's a history there, rapport, and what I hear, he likes the younger player. So I got my fingers crossed for Connor McMichael. Listen, Richard, I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. Why don't you tell everyone where we can find your work?
Well, you can find me on the Hockey Podcast Network, the Grit and Barrett podcast. My Twitter handle's down here low for all of you below, all of you watching here on the video feed. That's rbloss64. That's my main. The podcast feed is Grit and Barrett P1 on Twitter. During the summer, we've got some game overs coming out, which is where we talk about other NHL teams and what their fate was during the season. In terms of Bears content, it's going to be a couple weeks before we get stuff out because taking a little break from the postseason stuff to kind of, get myself right, recharge my batteries. So in a couple weeks, we'll bring more Bear stuff back with the schedule release and have a lot of great offseason content as well. Game overs, a few other things I want to work on as well. So even though it's summertime, I'll still be putting out episodes out here. So keep watching. Every Monday or Tuesday at latest is when new content drops.
All right. And we look forward to that, Richard. And thanks for joining us. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. And are you a fan of other GC sports? Well, Locked On has got you covered. We have Locked On Nationals, Commanders, and Wizards. So no matter what professional sport, Locked On has got you covered. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.